Hey, good morning. Michael Fisher here. What are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about taking children to the edge, the stone teachings. There'll be a series of videos I'm going to do on basically working with early children in the early ages. Let's just kind of take that 3, 4, 5 into the early childhood education, into kindergarten, primary grades, early, and so on. Now, I'm going to particularly taking a particular stance, and I'm going to call it the stone teachings. And so, if you want to quickly get a sense of that, I'm going to give you a little quick story of why I'm doing the stone teachings and how that's related to this early education. It's also got to do with my interest and excitement right now of working with the Nanaimo Innovation Academy and here on Vancouver Island, and be working as an artist in residency and curriculum consultant in some way as we develop, our relationship. It's just beginning. I've met some of the people there and very interested in their philosophies. So that's where I'm going. That's why I want to do this series of videos. It gets me thinking about early education, gets me thinking about how to have conversations with the Nanaimo Innovation Academy and others who are doing innovative work in education in the early grades and before grades. Parenting. So if you're any of those categories of interest, yeah, hope you tune in. And if you're just a citizen interested in, the future of our world, duh. How are we raising our children? Where are we going to bring them? How do we bring them through? How do we take them along? And so I'm going to be talking about taking children to the edge and the importance of that in the future in education processes. Story. Riding my bike this morning was a great ride. I have a lovely route, go up the hill, come up to this cliff, which I had kind of discovered we're on the edge of a mountain up here. And it's got some really nice forest around it, Douglas firs and cedars and maples. But this little cliff where I take my bike up and then I go and I sit on the edge of the cliff. I've been doing this for a few months now since coming here. And it's sitting on, there's this lovely little moss patch on the edge of this rock, drops off about 20 feet straight down on the edge of this road that hardly any traffic go to. So I can get quite a nice meditation there in the morning. Then I go there, and the first thing I do is I sit right at the edge. I hang my legs over the edge, and I put my hands down onto the rock so that I have bare rock to bare hands, so that there's a transmission of energy from the rock, the earth, to me. And it's specifically from this area, how the earth is vibrating energetically and what those rocks have stored in their memory systems from this place. Well, ancient rocks, right? These are ancient ancestors, as the indigenous peoples would teach in many tribes. And I've seen it in their philosophy of how different ideas about their teaching of traditional ecological knowledge, how important it is to listen to the stones. So that's why I'm also calling this the stone teachings. But this is my real experience every day, sitting there, listening. And what came this morning was someone walking up the road. And this is a person I've seen once before. She had her 2 dogs with her, middle-aged woman. And at some point, I opened my eyes in my meditation, just as she was close for some reason. I thought that was important. And when I opened my eyes, she was staring right at me and kind of slowed right down. The dogs were both looking up at me. They're like 50 feet away. And immediately I just lifted my left hand up slightly and just waved in this gentle kind of way. She waved back, relaxed, dogs relaxed, and she moved on. So then I started to realize, yeah, what does that look like? Person sitting up on the edge of a cliff. I had my bike helmet on. So that was probably a little bit relaxing for her, but I realized, this could easily be somebody sitting on this cliff edge, potentially going to jump. Yeah. You might not think that's what goes through people's minds, but I just really sat there and I went, I'm not sure if it went through her mind, but just a whole bunch of things kind of said to me, yeah, you need to let her know you're okay, that things are fine. Yeah, so there's a lot of fear about being on the edge. That's the point of this little story. And I realized if I was an educator, had a group of kids, had some staff, even parents going on a field trip, one of the things I would do, and I did this when I was a park naturalist in Alberta parks for a couple of summers, took many, hundreds of tours of adults and children out. And one of the things I would always do is to try and get them to risk, not just staying nicely on the trails. I would always take them off a little bit. I'd always take them to some places that maybe were a little riskier or edgier. This edge is a very interesting notion. Ecologically, it's a very interesting notion. We know at edges in ecological systems, something called the ecotone zone. That's where the highest diversity of plants and animals are taking place. Highest exchange of climate differences takes place on this ecotone. Let's just say for where a grassland comes and then starts hitting the forest, that would be an ecotone, or the edge of a shore of water body coming to the shore. That's called the littoral zone, which is also an ecotone transition zone. So edges and transitions go together philosophically. Well, I think this is now really important when we look at edges from at least 4 points of view. So let me go through those 4 points of view, and then I'll go further to talk about how I used to work with children at the edge. So first point of view of looking at edges and experiencing them and having children experience the edge is what I'm going to call the individual level or aspect of reality. And that goes in that direction. In the opposite direction is the communal. So we've got the I perspective, this will be the we perspective, and this is the individual, the group, consciousness, if you will. Very important to balance those in everything we do. This model I'm giving you is an integral model from Ken Wilber, the integral philosopher. But that's neither nor here important. And then on the other side is the objective reality of our experience, that quadrant. And then the other side, you can imagine the opposite, so-called subjective side of experiencing and reality. So we now have a 4 kind of quadrant directions of these opposing directions we can go. We can become more interested in the objective, we can become more interested in the subjective, the individual, and the communal. And what are all the combinations, right, of that model, which is called an integral model, a quadrant. It's a long, big theory of cosmic theory behind this, Ken Wilber's and my own thinking and others. Won't go into that. You could call it holistic if you want. But this keeps us, in a sense, balanced so that we're looking at reality from all of these perspectives and methodologies that go with those perspectives and interests that go with those perspectives, so that we don't get focusing too much on any one of them. And therefore, all 4 of those directions, quadrants, are equally important in this integral model. Right, that's fundamental to my thinking, to my integral philosophy about education and curriculum. So taking children to the edge, one of the things that I would do is I would always try to find a rock face, a cliff edge on many of the trails. Whenever I could, I would create that, or a really sharp cut bank. And maybe it's over a river, maybe it's over, just a cliff, mountainside. So I'd find something that's, not too hard to get to. You can get to quite easily, but I'd always get the children to sit on the edge before the, right where the drop off is. That's the transition zone. And, edges are interesting. Because as soon as you take an experience and you put an edge, like I just did with this edge, we now have a dynamic of energy and tension. And I'm really interested in creating tension in our experiencing rather than just constantly being in comfort. No, isn't that nice? Isn't that interesting? Let's stay in the path. Let's not get bitten by bugs or have an encounter with a creature, an animal, bear, whatever. And so that whole culture of fear and safety and security, not saying it is all bad, but when it gets way too overwhelmed and overwhelming of our experience and reality, and children totally pick this up when they have, quote, freaked out parents, teachers around them all the time, more or less, always concerned about safety. Then there are always teachers, parents, etc., other adults, could be siblings. They also can convey this message that the world's not safe. Long question philosophy about is the world safe and what does that mean? Let's not go into that big issue. So I would always take them to this edge of some kind, and I'm just giving you a representative model here of this teaching. And the reason why edges are so interesting is because we really become aware of, okay, let's just say we're on this side. We come to that edge. What might it mean and feel like? And do we want to cross that threshold of difference? Right? So you can see the notion of now I've raised difference with the notion of edge and edges or these transitions. And of course, one of the big things in our world today is dealing with difference, the other on the other side. Be the other side of the railway tracks. It could be, walking along and having a nice experience, and then all of a sudden we run into a bunch of bushes with spines and spikes and ticks and who knows what other kinds of things that are not so pleasant, mosquitoes. So not a lot of theorizing today about that per se, but you can get the sense that why I'm interested in taking people to the edge is not just to push them, get them afraid, get them to then be brave and courageous. Some training programs do that. Scouts and, some of those kinds of philosophies, Outward Bound and so on do that. There's a place for that, but that's not generally what I'm talking about today. I'm just talking about awareness. So what I'm interested in is how do we, let's just take a daycare center on a day-to-day basis on this property in place that the children get very familiar with. How do we help them deal with all these transitions? I'm not the only educator to talk about the importance of transitions, especially in early education. We got the transition from going from a parent secure place to have to go to that first day of daycare, and now kids are in a communal setting with stranger teachers and so on. This is all very challenging to the psyche, but so my question is challenging or not, that's a great learning site, right? That's why edges are really great learning sites. Why? Because at an edge, and we know this in animal species too, their attention and awareness goes up. When they're just in their same environment that they're comfortable with and they hang out in the deep forest all the time, their attention span is not up as high. Their attention span directly related to their fear-based system, their system that triggers about warning, risk, threat. Let's just call it the fear system. So, which is really essential to us in so many levels, but also at a very high level, fear is very important on the path to knowing how to move to fearlessness. And that's what my focus is, as you probably know if you read any of my work or looked at my books and my theories and teaching. It's how do we get from a culture of fear to a culture of fearlessness? How do we get children to move along, groups of people to move along in that direction? So we can look at the objective side. So if we go back to our 4-quadrant, that would be one way. What kind of edges are in your playground, your school ground, your classroom? If you're a teacher, you can do this in your home. Where are the edges that are interesting? Where are the edges that maybe are being ignored and people don't realize they're going from one edge to another edge, one transition zone to another transition zone, and then there's zones in between the spaces where people hang out, like a hallway. Well, do we help children become aware of, oh, that's a really important transition zone. There's an edge there, or even a knife edge is interesting, etc., etc. We could go into a whole thing. And so there's the objective things, that you can show them and get them to touch, to notice, to draw about, to write about a particular set of edges that are objective. And then we can ask them, well, how do you feel when you come to that edge? How do you feel about what's over on the other side of the edge, etc., etc. We can do this at the individual level. So the individual can do this experiencing of edges, and then as a group. And that's where we can go together to the edge, not just as individuals. So let's just get really concrete. I'm sitting on the rock today, and so the part of the stone teaching for me is I just kind of listen, and I just kind of go into a semi-light trance when I'm up on that cliff, just receiving whatever intuitions things might come. And I'm not saying I should have an intuition. I'm not saying I expect to, but I'm just being present in the now with the stone, the place. And what emerged today was, just imagine a small group of young children, 3 to 5 year olds, whatever, and we're taking the children up to this little park area that I'm talking about at the top of this little hill, this small mountain area. And there's this cliff edge, and you can just start to imagine what the children, the adults, the teachers, and the people in the houses that are just down below the cliff watching me, perhaps, or driving by in a car. And when you just now think of all those adults and all their energy about children and their perceptions that go with that kind of gestalt of energy, that geist of energy, the geist of the culture of fear and safety and security, which is really heavy right now, giving heavy messages about responsibility, about legalities. All of that is impacting education. All of that is impacting learning. All of that is impacting the experiential basis upon which these children come to encounter the stone, this cliff, the stones, the trees, the creatures, the animals, ourselves in that environment. And so there becomes this very interesting, I see it as a kind of a capsule of adult attention that's going into certain directions when kids come near to an edge. Especially in this case, a dramatic one. That's the one I'm talking about. It's a dramatic edge. Yeah, it is. All edges are not dramatic. No, no, they're not. They can be very subtle of an edge. Just a moment to think about that capsule of context, of environmental conditioning, and the inner subjective side of that atmosphere. Some people call it a climate of fear. It's an atmosphere of fear and anxiety and dread and possible, and this could happen and that could happen. Oh, we better really, control the kids, and we better really, tie them together. And I say, we're gonna have to cut those cords. Oh yeah, oh, we can talk about it, and we even might share it with some of the kids. We might sit down with, near the cliff, but not at the cliff, to do a transitional preparation. Yeah, anytime we want to do and teach good fear management, which is all about self-regulation, which is about learning to deal with your irrational side or your fear-based side, and the conditioning that you've learned and picked up in all your fears and anxieties that children also pick up. Some inherently are born with, some are quickly brought in by the culture and those environments around them. Yeah, the learning as a teacher is that we need to be very attentive to what kind of environment we're building, and then what kind of environment that's stimulating and re-triggering for children, so that their learning is already preconditioned by this fear, safety, security, and they don't, you know, want to, scare the teachers. Maybe they don't want to scare their parents, or they actually do want to scare their teacher and they want their parents. So you get children tipping different ways and reacting to this kind of, as I say, a capsule of observation and surveillance that they're under. And again, I said that's even by the audience of the public that are out there wondering, oh, I hope those kids are going to be safe up there. And then there's stories. Oh, child fell off of there, somebody fell off there and killed themselves, a year ago, or somebody, etc., etc. We don't know what those stories might be in an area or a district at the edges. It can also be at the edge of where, you've got a nice clean yards and everybody's got their nice order, and then all of a sudden you get to the forest and the ravine, and this is where the street people and, their wastes and their products, and all of a sudden it's messy and dirty and not nice and clean. Yeah, that's really important. Aesthetic. As an artist, I'm very interested in the aesthetics of safety, security, and risk, and fear. And how do we recognize when fear is starting to take over? And when fear takes over, it's not a good thing. Sorry. Fear taking over for a very minor amount of time may be very important to handle a danger or threat that's real. But it's these imagined threats, right, and fears about the insecurities that we can carry from a lot of painful memories, sometimes is unhealed. We can carry those kind of traumatic ranges of experiences into a field. And so we start creating this bubble, as I say, kind of a field, a collective of anxiety around the edges. And again, particularly an extreme edge. So I would get the children and the teachers, adults in this situation, to then say, okay, now we're going to start unclipping our fears. We're going to unclip the ropes that we've got you attached to, whether that's psychic ropes or whether it's actual physical ropes. And I've seen daycare centers use physical ropes and straps, etc., to chain children together, even just walking along the edges of the sidewalk compared to the road, which is right next to them. That's a really important edge. But what kind of learning is going on those edges, instead of how are we just protecting children from the risk of edges and encountering edges? As I say, of all kinds. Could be from the rich district moving into a poor district, and so on, where there's more criminal activity supposedly, and violence and so on, disease, all kinds of edges. You can just start to imagine how our world is an encounter. Well, if we're going to be innovative and training and educating innovative, creative, flexibly intelligent human beings, they've got to learn how to manage fear at the edge. That's really the point of the video, folks. I've given you some models to think about. This is just a very intro video, but wanted to get us thinking about, and so I'm looking forward to future conversations on this, and I'll do more series of possibilities of how to actually do curriculum pedagogy at the edge, taking children to the edge, and actually taking children to the edge to hang their legs off the edge and sit there like I do in the morning with the choice of, okay, I can take care of myself. I can sit here. Ooh, yeah. And then just imagine, putting the kids out and separately so they're not all together, because they could do it holding hands. They could sit on that edge, dangling their feet over the edge, just sitting there. Teachers watch and, make sure that they help them choose a good site to sit. And then the children could all hold hands to be together and have a communal experience. And then they could talk about that and do a subjective experience, or use our based ways of expressing what that felt like to be at that edge. And how do we approach it? How do we come back from the edge? Do we lean back and and crawl back, or do we just stand up right on the edge right away? Well, that's probably not. That's a little more risky. Could be done. All kinds of very interesting strategies right at the edge. Well, innovation, creativity is at the edge. I mean, that's what innovation, creativity is. You're at the edge. And it's like, how do you manage that? How do you work with that to make it to its most interesting, unique, perhaps really even mind blowing proportion of some change and transformation of the way we think and what we do in the world and how we do it? Well, that's where the innovators got to be. So we have to really work with a curriculum that's constantly thinking about edges, from the most subtle to the most extreme. All right, that's enough for today. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and ideas. Perhaps you can put your comments on this video, and or contact me. I'll leave my email at the bottom description of the video. Talk to you soon.